It's Thursday night, and this is Reverend Dr. D, and we are open to possibilities. Tonight, before we start, let's take a deep, cleansing breath. Let's breathe. Let's let the anxiety out. Let's let some of the energy from the debate tonight, let it go. Just let it go. Some of the animosity that we may have felt and that we may have sensed, and some of the stupidity that we may have even witnessed. Oh, dear God of many names, tonight in our talk of the fool forgets, but the wise man forgives. Let us remember to always forgive. Breathe deeply. Breathe in that spirit of forgiveness. And so it is tonight. And so it is. Forgiveness. How do you forgive when you can't forget? And even though you've forgiven somebody, what does it mean when you haven't forgotten the offense? Well, there's what I call toxic forgiveness. And toxic forgiveness is when you forgive someone and yet you still feel hurt and you haven't gotten over the event and you haven't gotten closure. Unforgiveness keeps the pain alive. Unforgiveness never lets the wound that we feel heal. We go through life and remind ourselves what was done to us over and over, stirring up the pain and making ourselves progressively angrier. Let me give you an example. Many years ago, I was in my 20s, my mid-20s, and I was a young minister that was booked in many different churches across the country. There'd be several thousand people waiting to hear me speak, waiting for me to show up. I was booked 3 years in advance. And a very well-known minister started a malicious rumor about me that was not true. And his brother-in-law happened to be the head of the denomination that I was part of. And that denomination called me on the carpet and grilled me for an hour on an event that never happened, that quite honestly, I was like a deer in the headlights. I had no concept what they were even talking about. But the result of that was that the 3 years that I was booked up, in less than a week's time, all came to an end. Talk about forgiveness tonight. People wouldn't touch me. I went to live with my grandmother for the next year and a half. Keep my head down. Stay out of the public. My grandma said, "Honey, stay sweet in your spirit. Keep your mouth shut. Those who love you need no explanation, but those who don't only want to add fuel to the fire." Oh my gosh. How could I let it go? My career was gone. My reputation was gone. My livelihood was gone. I had to close my office in Miami. I had to close my office in Northern California. I had to let staff go. I had nothing. All I had was me and the memory of what was said and what was done to me. Now, 6, 7 years later, I found out that that particular man, that minister, actually ran off with a 14-year-old girl in his church, and he got pregnant and left his wife and family, and actually took money from the church and embezzled money from the church. But see, that didn't help me and my forgiveness. But how do you let that go? How do you let the pain of that go? What goes on in that? When I was 4 years old, and my mother went to pour hot grease on my head, and it ducked in it and went on my back instead, and there's a scar on my back from the grease. How do I say, Mom, I forgive you, I let that go? And then when she disappeared in the middle of the night, and I've never seen her since. How do I forgive? How do I forgive her boyfriends that abused me? And how do I forgive her for letting them? And how do I forgive them for that abuse? How do I forgive when I can't forget it? Forgive and forget? To forgive is wise, but to forget is foolish. How do I forgive when my business manager ended up leaving me homeless, and I ended up homeless and on the street in 2005. Had been out of the United States for a couple years, and I came back to find that I had no car, no condo, no bank account, nobody to pick me up. Here I have no American money when I get back. All I have is my Louis Vuitton luggage. And I go to put my debit card in at the airport to have a little American cash. The account's closed. I arrive at LAX and I sit there for 3.5 hours and try to call on my little cell phone, and nobody picks up. What do I do? How do you forgive that? I end up in a motel on 7th Street in Long Beach, because the cheap motels, you know, you could rent them by the hour, I think. Why is this happening to me? I've got a doctorate. And in that time, I begin to have a change go on inside of me. I was telling somebody the other day that in that time, in that small little rat trap of a motel, that I try to listen to Spirit every day. I try to get the direction every single day of my life. I pray, create in me a clean heart and renew a right spirit within me. Do I nail it every time? Oh, I'm about as human as they can be, believe me. So I said, create in me a clean heart. And I felt Spirit speaking to my mind. And when Spirit speaks to me in my mind, it's almost as clear as if it were an audible voice going on. It says, go into the little kitchenette and wipe up that little mess on the counter. Take that sponge. And I went in, I grabbed the little sponge, and I blotted the little sponge over the mess. He said, look at the sponge. Can you see the mess? No. Run a little hot water. Put the sponge under the hot water and squeeze. When we're in hot water, or our back is up against the wall, whatever on the inside of us is what is going to come out. Whatever is on the inside is going to come out. You can go to all the classes in the world. You can read all the self-help books in the world. You can go to church every Sunday and say the rosary and kneel and read the Bible cover to cover. But if there's ugliness inside, it's going to come out when you're in hot water. So how do we forgive? Jesus taught us to forgive. But sometimes I think when he said, turn the other cheek, that it was like our butt cheek, you know, turn that cheek, I'm going to kick that one too. I mean, that's about what I feel sometimes. But learning how to forgive, it's hard. So what's some of the practices in forgiveness and letting it go? First, you acknowledge the situation. What was the situation? How did I feel? Was I misunderstood? Was I rejected? Was I deceived? And sometimes it takes some time to really consider what happened. Like when my mother left me in the back of the bar and just disappeared in the middle of the night. What happened? Why did she leave me there? You know, in my little mind, it was that I'm so bad that nobody wanted me. I'm so awful nobody will ever want me. And that has carried through 60, 70 years of my life. But what was the conflict about? And how did it make me feel? It made me feel unwanted, ashamed, guilty that I must have done something. So the second part of this is name your feelings and practice self-compassion. Sometimes our feelings get jumbled up. You know, we have hurt and we don't know what it is, and we don't know if we're ever going to know what it is, and the feelings get really jumbled up. So name what it is that you felt. When somebody did something against you, how did that make you feel? And don't make yourself wrong for feeling that. Don't feel guilty because you felt a certain way. There is absolutely nothing that shame and guilt ever did to help anybody. So name what that is, because we can't be healed from something that we can't name. The third thing is let it out. Building and bottling up the feelings is one way that we keep continued frustration, continued anger, continued resentment. When I was in that motel room in 2005 and I heard Spirit ask me to do that, and a couple of days later, I in my prayer time, I said, what is the lesson in this? What are you trying to teach me? And the lesson was a very loud voice. You are toxic. You are toxic. I'm a nice person. I'm toxic? I had unforgiveness that went from the length of my arm. Unforgiveness, resentment, bitterness. You name all the ugly things, I had them inside of me. I was toxic. And I began to pray and say, dear God, please lift the toxicity from me, that I may know you more, that I may be a light, that I might be a shining example of what God on earth is supposed to be. And I begin to walk on the beach, and I begin to cry, and I begin to scream, and I begin to pray, and I begin to sometimes act like a wild person. I begin to feel Spirit inside of me beginning to work some of these things out. I remember that back in the late 90s that I was doing a show with a famous entertainer. And the entertainer was at lunch one day with some people, and the entertainer happened to be talking to some friends that they had taken him to lunch. Some friends of mine were in that same restaurant. And the entertainer was slamming me about how I had absolutely no talent. And yet, I was paying that entertainer $1,000 a night for one show out of my pocket, because he had lost his $1 million contract that he had at one time. And most of it had gone up his nose, and his Las Vegas contract was over, and his mansion in Las Vegas was over. He had nobody wanted any part of that. But because he was kind of like a mentor in a way when it came to a fashion sense, when I started entertaining, I felt like I wanted to do something, because you see, I feel that everybody deserves a second and third chance. But the fourth thing, in giving a chance, for giving others is important, but protecting our own mental health and well-being is also of paramount importance. Forgiving doesn't mean that we have to continue allowing people to hurt us. It does mean that we must learn to establish healthy boundaries. And it does mean we have to learn how to communicate more clearly what our needs are and what our limits are. Now, I'm being honest with you tonight. I still have a hard time with boundaries. I still have let people hurt me, and I don't always say no and walk away when it would be best for me, but I am trying to establish clear boundaries. Now, in doing this, it doesn't mean I condone anybody else's actions. It just means that I'm not going to accept it in my life anymore. So the fifth thing is that we want to learn some type of empathy. I know this may sound strange, but what if maybe the person made an innocent mistake, and maybe what if we put ourselves in their shoes? I'm just saying. A couple of weeks ago at my workplace, one of my neighbors, who was a friend, got out of sorts at me. And they were pissed off at the operation, and they have every right to be pissed off at the operation. But you see, they started F you me, F you me. Well, that's not, I don't like something you've done. That's like me and my character. And when you assault my character, then yes, I had to go back and look and put myself in their shoes. They were upset. They lost it. Now the result is, not that I'm going to be mean to the person. In fact, I saw them the other day and I complimented them on a shirt they happened to wear. It does mean we're not going to be besties. It does mean I'm not going to dinner. I'm not going to lunch. It does mean I'm not going to be watching their dog, and they're not going to be watching mine. It means that I'm setting boundaries, even though I understand that they lost it, but putting myself in their shoes, I would not have lost it towards the individual. I would have kept it to the situation and the institution that they were having grievances with. The sixth thing is communicate to create closure. Getting closure when somebody has hurt us is one of the hardest things. Seeking closure and expressing our feelings of hurt is how we need to facilitate forgiveness. When I had lost everything and back in 2005 and was on the street at 55 years old, not a pretty picture. Doing whatever it was that I had to do to survive on the street. Educated. I remember staying in the doorways with a couple of guys one night. I said, "Can I sleep in the doorway with you? I'm homeless." One said, "Well, if you're homeless, you're an uppity homeless." You know, educated. I didn't look like what I was. I looked like where I'm going. Sometimes you have to look like where you're going, not like where you are at the moment. So during that time, I began to collect pop bottles and cans and trade them for money. And it was going to be almost Christmas season. And my business manager, who was like a sister to me, who had $6 million on her own and she didn't need any of my money, I knew that she liked the Cirque du Soleil show, because I had been one of the contenders for the Caw show for the MC position when I had auditioned at one time, and I knew she loved the show. So I was saving money from those cans so I could buy her something for Christmas, not as a love gift, but as a way of having closure. So I got enough together and I took 3 buses and a train from Los Angeles out to a place called Laverne. It's by Pomona. Took another bus and 2 other buses, and arrived at her doorstep, and she opened the door, and she's white anyway, but turned pale white, and there's her marble entry with the staircase coming down, very grand. I walked in, and I handed her the envelope that had the 2 tickets in, and she opened it and she said, "When are we going?" I said, "We're not." I said, "I've created this opportunity to put this behind me and have closure." I said, "There was a time that I would have said, why is this happening to me? But through this, I've learned how to say, what is the lesson in this for me? How is this going to make me a better person? How is this going to bring the Christ life into my life and out of my life? How am I going to live my life beyond this, not having to understand this, but to understand that forgiveness is the way to go, but never forget what has happened in this. And with that, I gave her the envelope, and I turned and I walked out. And when I shut the door behind me, I laughed and I screamed and I sang and I danced and I clapped my hands all the way back to the bus, all the way to the express, all the way to the train, all the way back into Hollywood. I was free. I was free. When we take the blockages and take the barriers that keep us from knowing that divine love, then love begins to pour through us, and it is, as the Bible would say, a peace that passeth all understanding. How could you have peace when everything turmoil around you is happening? I don't know, but I know you can. And as I begin to do that, I remember that as the years have passed, forgiveness isn't just a one-time event. Okay, but forgiveness is a continuous process of choosing love, especially self-love. That's a hard one for me. And choosing understanding over anger and over resentment. The 8th part is find the lesson and reclaim your power. Believe me, folks, forgiving is empowering. It allows me, let's say, to release a power that the offender holds over our emotions. It enabled me to regain control over my feelings and my life. And by forgiving, I chose peace over pain. I chose growth over stagnation. I was free from resentment. When we have resentment and unforgiveness, as the saying is very true, it's like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die from it. So tonight, as we begin to close this talk on the wise man forgives, the fool forgets, what is it that you need to forgive tonight? What is it that you need to let go of tonight? What is it in these last moments that as you breathe from the bottom of your toes, and if we exhale, what is that you just let go of? What is that pain that you just let go of? Fill yourself up with forgiveness. 2, 3, 4. What is that in your belly that's been there that needs to let go of? That resentment, that unforgiveness, that ugly attitude that starts seeping through all of our relationships, that starts seeping through the attitude towards yourself. Dear God, tonight I forgive myself for. Dear God, tonight I forgive so-and-so for. I recognize it, and I open my hand and I let it go. And so it is. And so it is. Tonight, as we stand here, let love fill us. Let love fill our bodies. Let love fill our minds. Loving doesn't mean that you have to be a victim. Sometimes tough love means you have to speak tough things in truth. Love does not lie. Love speaks the truth. Forgiving others is important. Forgiving yourself is important. When you forgive someone for wrongdoing, you don't forget the event. But once you forgive, the memory doesn't hurt as much. And this is Dr. D saying out until